Your night begins at the inn. It is a regular Saturday evening and the staff bard is playing a new rendition of Mary Ann's Ankles. Spirits are high, you've met some new companions, and though they are a little odd, nevertheless they are making good conversation. Except that one guy in the corner. He's being a little quiet and edgelordy. But then, adventure calls. Suddenly, the doors are flung open and a man in a skull-shaped mask strides in, flanked by a black knight in ebon plate and a hooded stranger, crystal bow at the ready. Screams erupt from the tavern as a commanding voice emanates from the man, or monster, with the skull-shaped mask. His words are chilling. It is time to pay. But in response, the old innkeeper merely grins, replying, I don't think so. Suddenly, a voice echoes from all around you. You hear a cry of, roll for initiative! And then, in a flash, the innkeeper leaps from behind the counter, axe already in hand. He lets out a bestial roar, screaming, I want to rage! And he's not alone. Now he's flanked by the bard and edgelord from earlier, as various members of staff draw swords. These people are adventurers. A devilish grin spreads across the edgelord's face as they prepare their blades, vocally stating that their next blow will not be personal. But before they can use their sneak attack, they are suddenly struck by 3 arrows from the crystal bow of the hooded stranger. The edgelord is instantly killed. The other members of staff, the adventurers, look on in shock and horror as the man in the skull-shaped mask tuts loudly and says, come on guys, you know you'd have to pay the franchise fee every month. Why is this such a big deal every time? The cost of resurrection is just gonna be coming out of your wages at the end of the month. I hope this isn't related to that union vote last week. You, the NPC, have just witnessed the player characters in action. They are, of course, the shadowy figures who just entered the inn. The ones who happen to be behind the illustrious Adventure Calls chain of taverns and inns. A rowdy multinational conglomerate staffed by adventurers, ready to protect customers from wandering dragons, ghouls, and monsters at all times. And the emergence of the chain in most towns has led to a 70% reduction in random encounters and even reduced the severity of monster attacks. Nevertheless, though, trouble brews on the horizon. Word is that the owners of Adventure Calls have stopped paying the king's taxes, causing consternation in the capital, and the bands of adventurers they've hired to staff their inns have begun unionizing. No doubt there will be plenty of conflict, conquest, and campaigning for the powerful lords who own Adventure Calls. Hard to imagine that they'd get here after such humble beginnings as everyday adventurers. But they did, and now all their problems are of their own making. Welcome to a Sandbox campaign, a woefully undersupported, underappreciated, and underutilized style of play in Dungeons & Dragons, and to be honest, almost every single TTRPG ever. Yet nevertheless, Sandbox campaigns are the epitome of the verisimilitude, immersion, and freedom that make TTRPGs superior to every other form of recreational activity, barring one: squirrel fighting. But what the hell is a sandbox? Well, nobody knows. Okay, hold on. Don't click off. We are going somewhere interesting here. It's just that the term sandbox has been used and abused more times than a kidnapped American tourist trapped in a middle-aged German's basement. Everyone has their own definition and it's extremely confusing. Especially when you speak English but everyone around you is speaking German. So let me clarify things. To me, sandbox games are those when the players are in charge of what they do in a game. They are non-linear campaigns and the players are typically free to pursue their own interests at their own pace in a world that is only limited by how well a DM has prepared the environment and can improv on the spot. In contrast to the sandbox, there is the nasty natural nemesis, the real road. Situated in opposition to sandbox campaigns, railroaded campaigns are a much more maligned gameplay style where players are governed by their DM and have no agency at all. This game style is detested online, but actually, there's a lot of railroad games taking place right now. Do you know where your children are? They could be in a railroad game as we speak. And while most people spit on the idea of a railroad campaign, most participants in railroaded campaigns don't even know it. It's pretty trivial unusual for DMs to carefully lay a hidden track before an adventuring party, secretly restricting their movements and actions such that the players can only ever go one way without any true decision being made by the party at all. This is essentially a DM writing a novel, with the players filling in the blanks. And in my opinion, it's pretty antithetical to the spirit of playing a role-playing game. But there are people who like to play in railroad games. It's not ontologically wrong to play in these, it's just a taste thing. That said, most people play a little combination of both a sandbox and a railroad in the game style that is lovingly referred to as the theme park game, not to be confused with the early 2000s theme park world. Theme park games are a guided experience where the players get some level of agency and choice, but ultimately must choose between a number of predetermined quests or tasks that a DM has prepared, i.e. they get to choose the different rides that they experience. Nevertheless, they still gotta go in the same destination. You gotta reach the exit eventually. Seriously, you can't stay here. You can't stay overnight in the theme park. You gotta get home. In modern games, that tends to mean adventures are all about the players trying to take down a big bad who will form a final boss encounter, leading to a crescendo of violence where the players and DMs will hopefully reach a satisfying conclusion. And to that I say, fee to your satisfying conclusions. Satisfying conclusions suck. I like my games like I like my novels, abandoned halfway through. I've been playing games in this hobby for decades, and still, to this day, the campaigns that I remember most fondly are the pure sandbox games. The ones where the players took control of their destiny and determined their own fates. For example, saying, "To hell with this, I will lick the magic rocks that glow with an eerie sheen." That was a quick game, admittedly. But more often than not, it's the sandbox campaign that allows players to take a look at some dragons kidnapping princesses and decide to join up and help them out. Hey, how else can you destabilize the monarchy? And that's what makes sandbox games beautiful. You get to choose your own goals, you know, be your own boss, reject modernity, become monkey. And there's lots of ways of doing a sandbox game, but at its simplest, it just takes a party of players who are ready to grasp the nettle and head out into a wider world, seeking to fulfill their own agenda and goals. For a DM, that means taking a little bit of a backseat when it comes to crafting a narrative or a story, and instead building a world for those players to interact with, creating factions, mapping locations, creating NPCs with their own motivations and desires, perhaps in opposition to the party, and then seeing what the players do. It's kinda beautiful. If you love something, set them free, so let the players go where they will and build the world around them as they do. I heartily recommend trying out a sandbox game if you never played one before. But okay, Discourse, if sandboxes are so good, if they are so cool, why does nobody play them, huh? Why are they so rare? How come, Discourse? Well, for lots of reasons. Firstly, they're hard to play for everybody. Kind of a skill issue. And there's a lot of blame to go around. Fellow DMs, I want you to get your website right now. Don't look at me like that. I know you've got them. I've seen under your bed. I've seen inside that box. Today, we won't be whipping unruly players into shape, however. We'll be self-flagellating ourselves because, yeah, we gotta put our hands up and say, our bad. As the prime mover of any RPG group, DMs typically get to choose what gets played and what gets rejected. Often it is the DM that brings a game prompt or a premise to a group and asks, who wants to play? DMs set the limits of what is possible in any group. They determine the field of possibilities. And many DMs reject sandbox games out of hand before ever bringing them to the table for consideration because, to be frank and maybe a little bit controversial to say, most DMs just want to tell their own stories at the table. They want to be a writer and a director, sprinkling in narrative and setting up scenes. It takes a lot of passion to run a game, and often RPG campaigns start because a DM wants to evoke some sort of theme or plot beat in a story. Or, you know, they just watched Flash Gordon and thought, the players are going to fight a flying Brian Blessed on Mars no matter what happens. But who wouldn't want that? Problem is, if you're building a sandbox game, you can't guarantee that that will happen. That the players will go to Mars and fight Brian Blessed while he flies about on angel's wings. Sandboxes are just harder to get excited about because all the fun stuff that happens in them happens at the direction of the players at the table, not what we DMs imagine in our head before we get there. Much easier it is to start a D&D game by creating a big bad, then have that big bad do big bad things, and then telling the players that they'll need to stop the big bad's badness before bad bads get too big bad. But DMs aren't just to blame here alone. Players too have much to answer for, because sandbox games live or die based on the players within them. Players need to really be on board with this style of play because it is a player-directed experience. Sandboxes ask a lot from role players. They need them to be on their A game. Players need to have motivations and goals for their characters. They need to have the initiative to take actions to achieve these goals. And they need to think about what their characters want and how that will impact the table. And unlike during my Friday night games, most TTRPG parties have more than one player. Can you be the player and the DM? I answer yes. And because most TTRPGs parties have more than one player, there's gonna need to be, therefore, some element of negotiation within the party about which agendas and goals to prioritize. There is a certain level of pain that emerges only when you're in a situation where an RPG party needs to make a major decision, but the party is split right down the middle with two different intractable positions, and nobody wants to compromise.
One of the cornerstones of Patty's Pub, a thick limes.
Yeah, don't tell me what
I'm gonna put my thumb through your eye!
Woe betide to that special kind of hell. Of course, there's one solution. Reduce the number of voters. Looks like you got gerrymandered. And yeah, sandbox games can sometimes be more prone to player versus player conflict as a result, though that's still pretty rare. Of course, there's an upside here for players that are looking for that next level engagement in RPGs and are willing to, you know, have characters that are opinionated and goal-oriented. Then they'll find that sandboxes really support that style of play. In fact, it's explicitly a requirement. And this is a little bit of a culture shock or a learning issue for some players because they subconsciously don't create goal-oriented characters. And I know exactly the reason why. Because goal-oriented characters with motivations of their own can be disruptive in traditional railroad and theme park campaigns. If you're not following the DM story, if you've got your own opinions on stuff, then often that can result in a bit of a problem player. As a result, most D&D characters are often a go-with-the-flow creation who are ready to be whisked along a railroad, with their strongest opinions being, we shouldn't steal from villagers. And I don't like skeletons. This is why so many characters are just an outrageous accent. Having characters with real ideologies, strong opinions, and motivations that are potentially incompatible with other party members or major NPCs, or the intended theme of a DM's campaign, can be a real game killer in certain types of campaigns, and most players know this implicitly. There is a great fear of being that guy. But a sandbox is where they must let loose and have this genie come out of the bottle. If you want to be with me, then baby, there's a price to pay. I contend that there is actually a huge pent-up demand for sandbox games from players, or at least there would be if they knew about that style of play. But role players never get to see great examples of sandbox games, and they're never really trained in how to play in sandbox games, and that's a problem of exposure, or lack thereof. Really, most players aren't brought up on a diet of sandbox games. Typically, they eat food. Ugh. Oh, and I guess almost every single pre-made adventure is some form of railroad or theme park style adventure. Almost every single pre-written adventure ever made tends to be a bit of a directed experience. Now, there is some light support for sandbox campaigns from developers like Wizards of the Coast. They often release campaign guides that are usually used to increase options for players in the form of new subclasses and spells. That's their main goal, but they also frequently come with adventure prompts for DMs as well as random table generators for loot and treasure. But this is pretty minor support for sandbox games. It's not really the focus of these things, and frankly, they're not really that useful. They're designed more to slot in with theme park games. Meanwhile, the vast majority of content for D&D these days are campaign adventure books like The Curse of Strahd, or Storm King's Thunder, or Tiamat 2, Electric Boogaloo. And these are all directed experience that consists of a DM guiding players from from one theme ride to the next, all moving in a relatively linear path, culminating in a final battle against the next big bad. Here's the exit. Don't forget to check out the gift shop. Sure, there are some, like Curse of Strahd, that drop players into an environment and ask them to do stuff, but really the players are heavily restricted in the choice that they can make. And there's a clear direction that the players must go in. Confront and defeat Strahd. They have a goal the DM has determined. And this is a problem that Wizards can't really get around because the adventures they release are pre-written. The problem is in their very core design principles. They give the players goals. They give the DM an arc to push the players in. They frequently come with boss fights. There is a demand in them that the players behave in certain ways and obey a certain game loop. In other words, the campaigns that Wizards put out these days are railroads, or at their best, theme parks. And when role players are only ever exposed to these types of adventures, these D&D adventures, these examples of play, that is what they'll emulate when they come to create their own content. That's what they'll expect when they come to play in their own games. And right now, they're trained to rely on DMs driving players forward and following relatively linear paths, for there to be right answers to questions posed by a plot, and to fear accidentally disrupting this plot. I played in parties of adventurers that seemed terrified that at any moment the Morrowind quest NPC pop-up would emerge if we took the wrong move. I can hear it now. The threads of prophecy is severed. Restore a saved game to restore the weave of fate. But this anticipation, this fear, is a mistake. Wizards of the Coast, along with most RPG developers, need to radically rethink the content that they produce for their role-playing games. To me, the role of campaign modules isn't to produce a story or a pre-written play that participants write their own lines for, but ultimately are beholden to certain arcs and plot beats. The goal of a campaign module should be, as with all game design, to create an environment fertile for a story to take place in. And a story only happens thanks to the people playing the game. Without that element of play, all these pre-written modules, all these campaigns, all these RPs are just books. They're just text to be read. They're not games. Sandbox games unlock that next level of play, turning tables of people speaking in funny accents into games, and imbuing decisions and actions with meaning, as defined by everyone at that table. Not an author of a module or just the DM, but everyone. That's how you get special moments. That's how you create memories. That's how you make it important whether or not the adventurer licks the glowing green rock or not. And it must be pointed out that some of the absolutely most popular pre-written campaign modules for D&D tend to be the ones that are closest to sandbox style gameplay and allow for the most player agency within their campaign, with Curse of Strahd being an obvious example as a fan favorite. Yet, I think we're going to see more and more linear campaign modules in the future, and that kind of bums me out. I want to see more content reminiscent of the Dracula dossier. This is a campaign where players are handed a diegetic, in-universe, huge book of Dracula lore and told to tell the DM what they want to do. But that type of content is super rare, and that's for a really simple reason. Pre-made campaigns with a plot are easier to make and monetize, and it helps cement a brand identity. If everyone finds Vecna in an adventure, no matter what decisions those players make, then they have a shared consensus with other players. They can have opinions on Vecna and stories to tell about Vecna and their encounter with Vecna. And crucially, they will recognize Vecna when he's sold as a plushie, or he's put in the D&D Monopoly box, or sold as a figurine. Vecna can act as a shared cultural touchstone. And you just can't create that same type of widely monetized brand in a sandbox book all by player agency. That's a pity. And if you like this video, please consider supporting the channel on Patreon. Times are really tough, and I get it, we're all feeling the pinch, but I can't do this without your support, and I can only make so many Fritzl jokes before I get demonetized. So check out patreon.com/discourse miniatures, and thanks to all my patrons, especially Sonic Bread and Crypto Kev, and I'll catch y'all next time. Bye-bye!